Mr. White, can you hear me? Can you hear me, Mr. White? You're muted if you can't.
Yes, I can hear you.
Great. Hi.
Okay. Um, so I have a document for the cues. Just lowering the volume some. Um, so if you want to start there, if you want to start with the structure, the game plan moving forward, and then the application for the conference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll jump back we'll jump in with the unit 4, the DBQs,
Okay.
that exemplar, and then we'll touch on the game plan. And then I got with Christopher today, or not I got with him, I saw him, and he said he was gonna when he signed himself up that he would be able to sign you up as well when he got the school credit card.
Okay.
So that
Okay.
should be that should be good. First, are you okay, or is your family okay?
Yes, it's gonna be okay, but just a little bit of a crisis in the middle of the night. But yeah, it'll be
Okay.
okay.
Do you
So
need anything?
no, no. I'm planning to be back tomorrow. Um, my wife is going to be able to jump in. She had some things she could not separate from today, so I'm here. So she'll be back. I
Okay.
wanted to still I'm working through the exemplar, but I wanted to share this with you. Something I pulled up. So I'm going to. I don't know if you can see this.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. So this is my guide to not only teaching but constructing the exemplar.
Yeah.
Uh, also, just what specifically is asked. Again, we paid attention to the verb. What is it asking you to do?
Mm-hmm.
And then going through and training your eye to um, underline those things specifically related to the ask. Um, and then just kind of following this and how I can teach them how to summarize the document.
Yeah.
Uh, so then it goes further, and I'm still going to need some time from you tomorrow, if that's okay.
Yeah, we can find some time tomorrow. I'm out of the building tomorrow, but we can hop on a Zoom similar to this tomorrow.
Okay, all right. Um, so today I think so. This is what I have. Um, Looking at these areas: historical situation, audience point of view, purpose. Um,
Yeah, I
See,
think
go
yeah.
ahead. I'm
No, that's great. And I think that's I think when we meet tomorrow, I think you and I can touch on like even how to map out the specific sort of action steps or the specific thinking steps for students.
Mhm.
I think for today, I think it can be really helpful for us just to make sure that we've got a clear understanding of what the exemplar DBQ looks like,
Mhm.
because that will inform how you're responding to data on a
Mhm.
daily basis leading up to the end of unit. So you said that you were not you're still working on the exemplar. Do you have that?
Yes, I'm still working on it.
Is it online or is it on the computer?
No, mm-mm.
Okay.
That's why I wanted to focus on that tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm still working through that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of the times it's helpful for us to start with the exemplar first and then kind of go back. And so one thing that we can do is we can use this tool
Hmm.
um we can use this tool. I think I want us to start like making sure that you and I are normed on
Hmm.
what that exemplar looks like. And so I've got some resources and we can delve into those. Do you have access to the Unit 4 assessment? And do you have access to that Unit 4 assessment? If not, I can send you a link.
No, I do. I just need to go into because you put it in the planning folder, right?
Yep.
Okay.
And then if you just go to scroll up a little bit more,
Right here.
I think I probably did link it in here. Scroll down. Um, and then keep scrolling. Great. Where it says Unit 4 Assessment DBQ. Great. Right. And then you can scroll down to the DBQ portion.
Okay. All right.
Great. Okay. Um,
So here we started out where with here, and I said evaluate, focusing on the verb, and then transformed and maritime trade were the
mhm.
focus of that uh, question, and then going through the document and highlighting those areas to construct the response.
Yep. So yeah, just taking a step back and reviewing what we had talked about last week so that you'd hit it that prompt is we're looking for the students to be able to identify or excuse me, evaluate the extent to which that the Portugal transformed that trade, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we're looking for how was it before, and then how is it different after Portuguese intervention. So those are the things that we're really looking for in students' responses. And so um, the when
Can
we
you
start
repeat
delving,
that? Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
yeah, no, absolutely. So we're looking for students to be able to identify like what was the what was the state of maritime trade before, and then what was the state of maritime trade after Portuguese intervention.
Mm-hmm.
And so like to what extent did it change between that before and after?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what we're looking for. And so
The comparison contrast of before and
mhm,
after.
yeah. And so when you're looking at a thesis for this, like whenever you're starting with it, you start off with teaching students how to write a thesis. And so we want them to like, we want to really get concrete on what that thesis looks like because it's going to drive the rest of the paper. And
Mm-hmm.
so when you were working on your exemplar, did you have a thesis already drafted?
Be direct, no.
Okay.
But
Um,
so in the thesis, what I've said to them before is you want to come down with a position, a declarative statement,
mhm.
one way or another, and then from there, anchoring those things from within the text that support your position, and then being able to discuss those things that are in contrast to that position and why that doesn't apply. Does that make sense? Is that
Yeah. And I want us to get even more sort of concrete. And so if you'll stop sharing your screen, I'll share mine. And then that
okay?
way we can I can sort of like put in some of the additional components. And so uh, okay, great. So you should be able to see our coaching document.
Okay. Yes.
Great. Okay. And so whenever you are working on the thesis, specifically for your DBQ, this is I've just copied in the language of the rubric. So it names that it responds to the prompt with a historically defensible thesis claim that establishes a line of reasoning. Okay. And so I know that you've not gotten a chance to write out your exemplar, but have you read through each of the documents?
Yes.
Perfect. So then what I'm going to do is I want to give you just a couple minutes. If you want to pull up this um our coaching doc, and I'll also drop it in the chat for you as well, just for easy access. Um, in that space where it says see it under the thesis, I want you to write out what your thesis would be to answer this prompt.
Okay, right here. Where the
Yep.
okay.
And then write out yours, and then I'll show sort of an exemplar, and then we'll spar and identify the commonalities and what the differences are between those. So
Okay.
I'll give you a couple minutes to just type that out in there.
I guess I got to click on that link in the or is there
In the chat. Yeah. I sent the link in the chat, so you can click on that. And it should pull you up to the document. Yep. Cool. So I'll give you the next couple minutes to type that, and then we'll take a look.
Let me just take a glance back at the document.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Here. Let's see. Almost with you. So can you see that, Miss Gardner?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm gonna look at it here. Great. So I want you to take a look at your that thesis that you just wrote there. And
Mm-hmm.
then one of the thesis statements that the College Board um identified as um an exemplar. And so just take a couple of moments, look at those two. What are some similarities that you notice between those two? And then what between yours and the exemplar? And then what are some differences between those two that you notice?
Um, the only thing that is the same is that focus on changes, but this specifically talks about goods, spices that continue to be traded. In a comparison to what has happened over time in the past.
So you named that.
Also
Oh,
identify
go
food
ahead.
being, as I was not specific in indicating the Portuguese there, the Indian Ocean, very specific. Indian goods, yes. That included spices, not only traded locally, but throughout the Middle East and Chinese markets,
Yeah,
which was consistent as it has been uh, in the past.
yeah. Um, I think so. If you were to look at this thesis statement, because again, just grounding us in that prompt, we're evaluating the extent to which Portuguese changed maritime trade, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in the exemplar, what what is the degree like what is the degree to which they're identifying this level of change?
Well, it's saying that there were a few changes. It's not indicating. It's not saying there were, massive sea change, but there were a few changes. So that's what I'm grasping from that.
Yeah. One thing I also want to name is I'm going to put in another sort of an exemplar that would have gotten the thesis point because that's what we're looking at. Like, are we getting the point?
Mm-hmm,
And so this is another one that College Board identified as one that would get the point.
mm-hmm,
And so it has a different thesis in terms of like the position it's taking.
mm-hmm,
But when we're thinking about sort of those the differences you identified before in terms of specificity, it's still here. It's still taking that stance. Um, and I think, like that's gonna be the real crucial component of like how do we know what is the evidence or what is the example that we can provide that identifies the indication in trade
mm-hmm.
or that change in trade. Okay. So with that, if we were to distill, sort of the like key things we want students to walk away from, or what is the like absolute this is what students need to do in order to get this point, what are those things? Like if we were to create a checklist.
Well, one of the things that was affected is the Portuguese in facilitating these few changes. The things that I grasped from it is there was more focus on maritime versus over land because and this is where I get caught up because I feel like I'm giving too much information and not the pinpoint. But
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that created the change was how they acquired these goods, um, and cut out uh, the middle person, so to speak, going
Mm-hmm.
over land. Um, these changes were created by the use of new technologies in terms of types of ships that were used and even the technology on the ships in terms of the types of sails. Would that be off point?
So you're getting really specific, which is great, and that would be an example of it. But when we're thinking about our criteria for success, it's going to be a little bit more not general, but what are like the things that if you're saying, yep, they did this thing, they did this thing. So with a thesis statement criteria for success, one of those things that you would look for is that it takes a position on extent to which Portuguese influenced maritime trade. And so
Mm-hmm.
this can be like significant, significant change or even minimal change.
Okay.
As long as like it's a defensible position, and I'm actually going to add that it takes a defensible position.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's one component. Then
Mm-hmm.
the other component is that they are identifying specific reasons for their answer. And so this will be found in evidence rooted in the documents.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's what's going to allow them to start identifying their line of reasoning or tracking how they're achieving it.
Okay. Well,
Good.
significant was really how they got access to the markets.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that was significant. That wasn't, and in some way, similar because they weren't the first to engage with the maritime routes. However, they kind of perfected it and were able to do things quickly and not so reliant on um, and I guess this is where I get too specific weather patterns because of the sails were able to capture winds, whether they were traveling, the winds were blowing from east or west or whatever.
Hmm.
So, um,
Yeah, and I think we'll in a second we'll zero in on like the document components of how do we get students to do this. Because like everything you're saying that would be what they would use in their body paragraphs in their essay to get those other points. Okay, so the thesis is just that starting point
mhm.
um for their essay.
Okay,
And
yes.
so and so that's so when we're and so that's what we're going to kind of focus on. And then how do you we'll actually transition to sort of that document you showed me a second ago of then great knowing that this is this is the thesis statement we want students to write. We'll then start to look at the how do we get there in terms of like those reading strategies, and we'll start prepping for that. And then that way tomorrow when we meet we can start looking at the body paragraphs, the contextualization, the interpretations, and those types of things.
Okay.
So with that, um if we were as we are sort of moving into this next sort of phase, I want us to think about how I want us to think about how you can use that thesis statement, those thesis statement exemplars, to craft thinking steps to provide students. So it's going to be use the exemplar, create thinking steps for students when reading their documents. Okay. So that's what we're going to start doing now. And that document that you showed a second ago will actually be really helpful. Sorry, I got some rude children just walking into my office.
Okay.
No, so with this, excuse me, I want us to now we're actually going to take a look at knowing that this is what we're looking for. And just in terms of the baseline argument, what
Mhm.
then what then do we need to do in order to identify that in the documents themselves? And
Okay.
so when looking at this first document,
Let me go back to it.
great. Yeah, and I've also got it on my screen.
Okay. Hold on, let me go to your screen so I can see it. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So you named some of those different strategies that you want to use whenever going through each of your documents because you really want to source them. And
Mhm.
effective note taking is what's going to be really impactful for students. Oops. It's going to be what's really impactful for students
Okay.
when they are actually going through um, the documents in an efficient and effective manner.
Mhm.
And so there are a couple of things that you want students to be looking for when they're going into these documents that will help them answer that question.
Mhm.
Um, and so, excuse me, what are those things? So if we were to look at this document here, what would you want students to like focus in on to help them create their thesis statement?
Okay. Let me go back
Mhm.
and to look at the exemplar again. Can you pull the exemplar back up and
Yeah, of
then pull
course.
this back up?
Great.
Okay. Can you go back to the document?
Absolutely.
Mhm. Okay, so then I would say something like there were traditional trading partners who expressed concern about the negative impacts created by the Portuguese um, that would extract wealth or extract um, revenue. This is one of these words here, revenue,
Mm-hmm.
from the traditional ways of trading before their arrival. And this was advice given by Muslim merchants. And the concern that the Portuguese would take possession of the cities and that trade for spices was a pretense. So does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So there are a couple of things I want to zoom in on that I think are really important that as we're thinking about rolling this out to students, we want to make sure that they're also capturing.
Mm-hmm.
So the first is you named that like the source are Muslim merchants, or you name that this document is from the point of view of Muslim merchants. How do you know that?
Because it's stated the advice given in 1500 by the Muslim merchants, and it also indicates where they were from.
Mm-hmm. So when thinking about the first step that you take when approaching a document, what is that step? What's the step you
So
just took?
I would identify evidence, textual evidence, um, from the
Did
point
you,
of view.
but did you identify textual evidence? Where did you look? Is it part of the text or was it somewhere separate?
Well, this is part of the text, and
Well, so this right here is just the source line. So
okay.
this is just telling you where this source is coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is not part of the text. This is just giving you that sort of contextual information. And so like you'll see that on all of them. All of them are going to start with saying the source.
Okay.
And so the first thing you want students to look at is the source. Like where is this document coming from?
Okay.
Because what that does is it helps you figure out a couple of things. It helps you figure out what is the point of view. And
Okay.
so if we're looking at this point of view, is this from the point of view of like the Portuguese? Is this from a point of view of people who benefited? Is this from people who aren't benefiting?
It was the point of view of those that were negatively, adversely affected.
Yeah.
It was the Muslim merchants. And so I guess I'm drawing inference from this dialogue here between, and I'm assuming it was those that were connected or either Muslim merchants that were communicating with those rulers, and also drawing upon the prior loyalties and them contrasting the motives
Hmm.
of the Portuguese, and where they kind of delineate what they're really all about, is taking possession rather than, you know, fair and reciprocal trade.
Hmm. Yeah. And so I think one thing that's also really important as we're thinking about the context or even the key takeaways that we would want students to have from this is, when was this advice given versus when was this source published?
Okay. Published in 1551.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the advice was given in 1500. So
Mm-hmm.
it was 51 years. It was published 51 years afterwards.
Why why might that be significant?
Well, because, there's a lot of room for perceptions and distortions of the
Mm-hmm.
way things really were over time versus, it being published immediately at the point that this was recorded. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest takeaways here is that, or something to keep in mind, is that this was advice given in 1500. By 1551, the Portuguese had already consolidated their power in this area. So this is serving as like almost an ominous like prediction of what was going to come to fruition.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was almost like, oh wow, yeah, here's the confirmation that we could have seen the writing on the wall, on the writing on the wall from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And so I want us, and I know that we're almost here at time, but looking at I want us to do a similar kind of process of identifying the following things in sort of the in document two. So I want it to be where you start off identifying who's the source,
Mm-hmm.
and then what is their potential POV, and then what is just the overall summary of the document.
Okay.
What is the overall message? And then that way, what we'll do is we'll start there, and then that way we can start figuring out how would it play into us crafting a thesis.
Okay.
And so we'll do this with document two, and then we'll we'll stamp sort of what you and I have, and then we'll close out, and then that way we can plan for what we'll talk about tomorrow.
Okay.
Cool. So I'll give you a couple of minutes. So identifying what are those two things that you're going to be focusing on with this source or with this document.
Okay. The source
Mm-hmm.
and okay. Developing the source and really what the focal point is, the point of view.
Yeah. So the source and like how that contributes